My wife had an affair with my cousin and ended up having his child. For years, my family kept the whole thing under wraps, and now that I've finally made something of myself, they suddenly want to reconnect. I'll do my best to lay everything out because there's a lot to unpack here. I'm 44 now, and I've been married for 10 years. My wife, who's 41, and I have been together for 13 years. We have an 8-year-old kid, and life feels steady and good. This isn't my first marriage, though. I got married young, at 22, and 3 years later, it was over. To this day, I'm not entirely sure why. My ex-wife, let's call her Laura, had been part of my life since middle school. We were those classic childhood sweethearts, inseparable through high school and college. As soon as we both landed decent jobs, getting married felt like the natural next step. At first, things were great. We were happy, and life felt simple. But after a couple of years, something shifted. It felt like she wasn't as interested anymore, no matter how hard I tried to keep things alive between us. A few weeks before our 3rd anniversary, Laura hit me with divorce papers. I fought hard to save our marriage, but she wouldn't budge. She just kept saying she was done. That was it. No real explanation other than she didn't love me anymore. I was angry and confused, but there wasn't much I could do. I didn't want to drag things out and make life worse for both of us, so I signed the papers and let her go. The whole thing went smoothly, mainly because we didn't have much to split. Once it was finalized, she packed up, left town, and cut off all contact. I heard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances, but Laura never reached out, and honestly, I never saw her again. The strange part was how my own family reacted. Around the time of the divorce, they slowly started pulling away. I figured they'd stand by me, but instead, they became distant, almost like I had done something wrong. I kept trying to stay in touch, but after a while, I realized they'd blocked me on everything. I even showed up at their door a few times, but neither my sister nor my parents would let me in. It was a rough period in my life. I didn't know why they were shutting me out, and I was already struggling to process the divorce. For a couple of years after that, I could barely function. I quit my job and spent months just sitting at home, completely drained. If it hadn't been for my friends, I don't know where I'd be. They stuck by me, pushed me to get back on my feet, and eventually helped me find some direction again. Opening my own restaurant had always been a dream of mine, but I kept putting it off during my marriage. I wanted to make sure Laura and I were financially stable first, but after the divorce, I thought, why wait? I finally decided to go for it, naming the place after something my parents had suggested years ago. My friends were the ones who helped me get investors and flesh out a business plan. A few years down the line, the restaurant opened, and slowly but surely, I found my footing. It took 4 years after the divorce to really feel like myself again. 2 years later, I met the woman who is now my wife. Funny enough, she approached me at an event and mentioned how much she loved the restaurant. We got to talking, and one thing led to another. After 3 years of dating, I asked her to marry me. I figured it was worth giving love another shot. 10 years have passed, and here we are, me, my wife, and our son. Life has turned out pretty good, both personally and professionally. My career has taken off in ways I never imagined. It all started with that little restaurant, but as it gained traction, we slowly expanded. Now, I'm the CEO of my own hospitality company, running a chain of hotels and restaurants that people actually seem to like. We're even eyeing expansion beyond the state line, hoping to make a name for ourselves nationally. I've worked my tail off to get here, and while the journey hasn't been easy, I recently agreed to an interview that felt like a milestone. Proof that I'd really made something of myself. I never thought much would come of it, but somehow, that interview found its way to my family, and to be honest, I had no clue it would stir up such a mess. The network wasn't exactly obscure, but I figured the chances of them watching it were slim. Even if they had, I never expected them to show up at my workplace. It's not like my office is hard to find, but barging in like that? Yeah, that was out of line. Yet, 3 days ago, that's exactly what happened. It was surreal. I was in the middle of work when the receptionist called to let me know my family was outside waiting to see me. My first thought was that she meant my wife and son, which struck me as odd since my son was in school and my wife was at work. But no, she clarified that it was my sister and parents. I couldn't process it. I told the receptionist to send them away for the time being, but I'd talk to them later. Naturally, they didn't take no for an answer. They made a scene, and before it got worse, I figured I'd better handle it myself. I wasn't about to have security throw them out without at least hearing what they had to say. So, I walked down to the lobby, and just like that, it was as if nothing had happened. They smiled, congratulated me, and acted like we hadn't gone 2 decades without speaking. They talked about how proud they were, how my story was inspiring, and how great it was that I'd made it to TV. They kept hinting that, as my family, they should have been part of that success. It felt off. They mentioned seeing my family in the interview footage. I tried to brush it off, saying I needed to get back to work. In the segment, I talked about how much my wife and son supported me, and there were a few pictures of us. Apparently, that struck a nerve. They started asking about my wife and grandson, hinting they wanted to meet them soon. And then, out of nowhere, they flipped the script, telling me I should have tried harder to reconnect after the divorce. They acted like I hadn't done enough to reach out. That's when it clicked. This might be my chance to finally get some answers. So, instead of walking away, I stayed. I sat down with them right there in the lobby, hoping for closure. That's when everything unraveled. Turns out, my ex-wife, let's call her Laura, had been cheating on me. I suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed still felt like a punch to the gut. The kicker? My parents knew the whole time. Worse yet, they helped her cover it up. But, of course, they had their reasons. At least, reasons they thought were justified. Laura wasn't cheating with some random guy. She was with my cousin. Let's call him Carl. Suddenly, everything made sense. Carl was my uncle's son, my dad's older brother. I never liked Carl. He was the kind of guy who coasted through life, thinking the world owed him something. His mom passed away when he was a baby, so the family handled him with kid gloves. He could do no wrong. And since my uncle founded the family business, where my dad worked, Carl pretty much had free reign. Apparently, when Carl decided he wanted Laura, and she went along with it, my family chose to back them. They didn't want to upset my uncle, even if it meant tossing me aside. It hurt, realizing how easy it was for them to pick Carl over me. During the divorce, my uncle made it crystal clear. If anyone kept in touch with me, they'd be cut off. So, my parents and sister went along with it. And the most unbelievable part? Laura was pregnant at the time. Yeah, I had a kid I never even knew about. She told them she was carrying my child, but no one thought to inform me. Since Laura had already moved out, she wasn't showing yet, and I had no way of knowing. By the time my daughter was born, I was completely out of the picture. My daughter, who's almost 20 now, grew up thinking Carl was her biological father. Hearing all of this felt like someone else's story. I couldn't wrap my head around it. My family thought they did the right thing, securing their place in the family and staying connected to their granddaughter. I see it differently. To me, they were just cowards. They could have told me the truth, but instead, they chose fear. Fear of my uncle. And for what? My dad could have left the family business and sued for all I care. But instead, they buried everything, leaving me in the dark. Even now, I can't understand why they never told me about Laura's pregnancy, or that I had a daughter out there somewhere. They sat on this secret for 20 years, 2 whole decades, without breathing a word to me. Now, all of a sudden, they felt this overwhelming wave of guilt and wanted to patch things up. But I wasn't buying it. I could see straight through their act. After they laid everything out, I told them I needed them to leave. I wasn't in the right frame of mind to forgive them, not after everything they had just admitted. I tried to stay civil since we were in the middle of my office lobby, but that didn't mean I was going to entertain their nonsense any longer. Of course, they didn't take it well. As soon as I told them to leave, they started going on about how I needed to consider their side of the story, how difficult this whole thing had been for them too. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told them point blank that the only reason they were here now was because I had made something of myself, and they were looking for a way to cash in on it. They denied it loudly. My sister even had the nerve to claim that they were the reason for my success. She brought up the fact that they were the ones who came up with the name for my restaurant back when it was just an idea, as if suggesting a name somehow earned them a stake in everything I had built from the ground up. I almost laughed out loud. It was ridiculous. I reminded her that when I was struggling, when I was at rock bottom, they were nowhere to be found. I built everything without their help, My friends were the ones who stood by me, not them. Suggesting a name didn't mean they could take credit for the years of blood, sweat, and tears that followed. I couldn't help but chuckle at how absurd the whole thing was. But I wasn't going to waste any more time arguing. I told them flat out that if they didn't leave, I'd have security escort them out. They didn't listen, of course. They insisted they weren't leaving until we resolved things. I wasn't interested in resolving anything. So, I did exactly what I said I would. Security showed up and walked them out. They didn't go quietly, kept pleading their case even as they were being let out the door. They kept saying they had no choice back then, but I don't believe that for a second. They did have a choice. They just chose the easy way out, and now they have to live with the consequences. They've managed just fine without me for 20 years. I have no doubt they'll keep surviving without me in their lives. But they didn't stop. It's been 3 days since that mess, and they haven't let up. They haven't shown up at my office again, probably afraid of security, but they're lurking outside. They've been sending emails to my work, messaging me on social media, even waiting near the parking lot hoping to catch me when I leave. Their tone has shifted. Now it's all apologies. Message after message, full of regret and desperate pleas for me to hear them out. It's starting to look a little pathetic, if I'm being honest. I haven't stopped to talk to them. I just drive past. And yet, I can't shake the feeling of pity creeping in. As much as I hate to admit it, I feel sorry for them. I've talked it over with my wife. No matter how I feel about my parents and sister, there's still the matter of my daughter, the one I didn't even know existed until a few days ago. That part complicates things. My wife thinks maybe I should invite them over, sit down, and try to have a real conversation. She says it might help clear the air, get rid of all this negativity hanging over me. She's worried it's taking a toll on me emotionally, and maybe she's right. But honestly, I'm not interested. I can't handle it right now. After learning the truth and trying to wrap my head around everything, I don't have the emotional bandwidth to entertain their sob stories. I'd rather keep ignoring them and hope they eventually give up. The big question we're wrestling with is whether I should reach out to my daughter. She's almost 20 now, practically grown, and has no clue I even exist. Part of me feels like I should track her down, but another part wonders if I'm just opening up another can of worms. I keep wondering if I'm being unfair by shutting my family out completely after all these years. Maybe I should give them a chance. But then I remember how easily they discarded me when it suited them. I don't know what the right move is. Update, 1 week and 3 days later. My wife and I decided to keep ignoring my family. It feels like the best course of action for now. Luckily, they haven't shown up at my office for the past few days. I'm guessing they either got tired or are scared of security at this point. Either way, I'm relieved. It's been easier to stop thinking about them now that they aren't physically around. I realize now that part of the reason I felt guilty was because their presence was a constant reminder. But with them gone, I feel a lot lighter. I don't even flinch at their messages anymore. No matter how many times they apologize, it won't undo the damage they caused. And I'm finally okay with that. No amount of apologies can undo the fact that my family let me down in ways I never thought possible. I haven't even bothered blocking them, despite the endless stream of messages from different accounts and emails. What's the point? They can make all the fake accounts they want. I'll just keep ignoring them. Let's see how long they can keep this up. But there's a bigger issue at hand, my daughter. Neither my wife nor I really know how to handle this. During that awkward lobby conversation, my parents mentioned where she goes to college, so now I at least have her name. I haven't made a move yet, but my assistant tracked down her social media. I've stared at her profile more times than I care to admit, wondering if I should reach out or just leave it alone. How do you even start a conversation like that? Hey, I'm your biological father. Surprise. Doesn't seem like the right approach. She's not a child. I can't just barge in demanding to play a role in her life. And honestly, I'd rather keep Laura out of this altogether. I have no respect left for that woman, or for my so-called family. But my daughter, she's different. She didn't ask for any of this. She's my daughter, regardless of who raised her. If you've got any advice on how to approach this, or if I even should, I'd love to hear it. You all have been incredibly helpful, and I appreciate the insight. Update 2. After reading through everyone's comments, my wife and I decided to move forward. Waiting around for the right moment wasn't going to change anything. If we kept hesitating, we'd never take that first step. Since she's in another state, we figured it wasn't appropriate to just show up at her college unannounced. Instead, we sent her a message on Instagram. We explained things as gently as possible, keeping it polite and straightforward. Now, we're just waiting for a response. I know this won't be easy for her. It's not easy for me either. I have to say, I'm incredibly grateful for my wife. She's been nothing but supportive, even though I know this stirs up a lot of complicated emotions for both of us. I want this to work. I really do. I'd love to build some kind of relationship with my daughter, and I'm hoping she feels the same way. As for my parents, they haven't shown up at my office for a while. Maybe they finally got the hint, or maybe they're just scared of being escorted out by security again. Either way, I'm relieved. Yesterday, they sent me a long email apologizing again. This time, they said they wouldn't reach out unless I contacted them first. It's a small victory, but I'll take it. I'm glad they've realized I'm not interested in talking to them right now. I've got enough on my plate without them adding more drama. If I ever feel ready, I will be the one to reach out. But honestly, that doesn't seem likely anytime soon. Knowing the truth about why they cut me off has only deepened the sense of betrayal. The only silver lining in all of this is that I've learned more about my daughter. I'm hoping she's open to the idea of getting to know me. I haven't told my son about her yet. I don't want to get his hopes up if things don't pan out. But if this works out, maybe he'll gain a sister he never knew he had, and I'll meet the daughter I never knew existed. It's a lot to process, but we're doing our best to handle it. Update 3. 2 weeks ago, I reached out to my daughter through social media. I sent her a message explaining everything: who I am, our relationship, and how this all came to light. Today, I finally got a response. She said she talked to her mom about it, and Laura admitted that I'm her biological father. She was shocked, of course. For 20 years, she believed Carl was her dad. She told me she wants to meet us, me, my wife, and our son. She's curious about our family and wants to hear the full story directly from me. Since she can't afford to travel right now, we're flying out to see her this weekend. She also mentioned she isn't speaking to her mom at the moment. Apparently, when she confronted Laura about it, Laura tried to lie at first. But eventually, the truth came out. I haven't heard a peep from Laura yet, and frankly, I hope it stays that way. I have no interest in talking to her. Once my family found out I contacted my daughter, they immediately went back on their word. They've been trying to reach me nonstop ever since. Apparently, my uncle is furious that I found out. I guess 20 years of effort to keep me in the dark just went up in smoke. Now my uncle's pointing fingers at my parents, blaming them for letting it slip. It's pathetic. My dad, even though he no longer works for my uncle and runs his own business, is still terrified of him. He's been begging me to explain that neither Carl nor my uncle had anything to do with me finding out. But honestly, what's the point? Even if I tried to explain, nobody would believe it. They're the only ones who could have kept this a secret for so long. Besides, I couldn't care less about protecting their reputations. They didn't care about protecting me. Most of my extended family hasn't spoken to me in 20 years. Funny how quickly they're all scrambling to save face now that the truth is out. Let them panic. I've got bigger things to focus on, like meeting my daughter for the first time. I lost 2 decades with my daughter because of my family's betrayal. If there's anything I can do to make up for that, this is it. Update 4. Today, I finally met my daughter, my wife, son, and I flew out to see her, and at first it was awkward. There were moments where none of us really knew what to say, but as the day went on, the tension gave way to something else, something warmer. It was emotional, sure, but honestly, it was just nice. Despite growing up with 2 people I consider some of the worst individuals I've ever known, she turned out to be a kind, thoughtful young woman. She's mature beyond her years and sharp as a tack. I don't know if that's because of who she is at her core, or if, ironically, Laura and Carl somehow raised her well. Either way, she's impressive. We sat down for a long talk, and of course, the conversation drifted toward Laura and Carl. She told me, straight up, that she didn't care how they felt about her meeting me. Now that she knows the truth, their opinions don't carry the same weight. That said, she isn't planning to cut them off completely. They're still her parents, and since she's their only child, she feels a sense of responsibility toward them. But she made it clear, she needs space from them for a while. She wants time to process everything, and I can't blame her for that. She also said something that stuck with me. She needs time to build a relationship with me. I get it. She's in uncharted territory, just like I am. This isn't the kind of thing you can rush, and I told her I'll be patient. The good news is she got along really well with my wife and son. Watching them interact, you wouldn't think this was the first time they'd met. It felt natural, which was more than I could have hoped for. We had a nice dinner together, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like something was falling into place instead of unraveling. Over the course of our conversation, we found out that my parents, her grandparents, had been in regular contact with her this whole time. She always thought it was strange how sentimental they were, considering they weren't her real grandparents, but rather her grandfather's brother's family. Now it all makes sense. Learning the truth has changed how she sees them. I could see it on her face. I know how she feels, even if I'm years ahead in dealing with it. She's 20, and for her, this betrayal cuts deep, probably deeper than it does for me. I had time to get angry, to grieve, to accept it. She's just starting that journey. We're going to take this slow. It's a lot to unpack for both of us, but I'm hopeful. I've already missed out on too much of her life, and I'm not going to let that continue. Honestly, I'm grateful. The meeting went better than I could have imagined, and I think all of us, my wife, son, and daughter, felt a little more complete by the end of the day. No matter what Laura, Carl, or the rest of my family did, this chance to build something with my daughter means more than their betrayal ever could. It won't fix the past, but it's a start, and I'm going to make the most of it. From what my daughter shared during our visit, life for Laura and Carl wasn't as picture-perfect as they probably imagined it would be. After Laura left me and moved in with Carl, things seemed stable on the surface. They raised my daughter together, presenting themselves as the perfect little family to everyone around them. But underneath that facade, there were cracks that widened over the years. Carl, it seems, never quite grew out of the entitled, lazy mindset he had when we were younger. He drifted from job to job, never sticking with anything long enough to build a real career. From what my daughter told me, Amy was the one who held things together financially. She worked long hours, often sacrificing time with their daughter, while Carl coasted by on half-hearted business ventures that never really took off. The resentment between them slowly built over time. Laura was never the type to openly confront problems. She avoided them, just like she did with me. She let things simmer until they couldn't be ignored anymore. By the time my daughter was in high school, their relationship was more about convenience than love. Carl, unsurprisingly, tried to live vicariously through their daughter, pushing her toward paths she had no interest in. He wanted her to go into business, follow in the family's footsteps, but she had her own ideas. She said there were constant arguments. Carl couldn't handle the idea that his daughter didn't want the life he envisioned for her. Laura, on the other hand, started to withdraw. My daughter said she always got the sense that her mom was weighed down by regret, though Laura never admitted it outright. Maybe she realized, too late, that she'd made a mistake by siding with Carl and cutting me out of her life. Or maybe it was just guilt eating away at her. Either way, she seemed exhausted, emotionally and mentally, by the time my daughter was old enough to notice. And then there were the rumors. Apparently, Carl had a habit of straying outside their marriage. Nothing was ever confirmed, but my daughter overheard enough arguments to piece it together. Laura either looked the other way or convinced herself it wasn't happening. In the end, they weren't a happy family, not by any stretch, but they held on to the illusion, maybe because they felt they had to. If they admitted the cracks, it would mean admitting they'd made the wrong choices all those years ago. Hearing all of this didn't make me feel vindicated. If anything, I just felt sorry for my daughter, being caught in the middle of it all. But in some twisted way, I think Laura and Carl got exactly the life they built for themselves. A life built on lies and selfish decisions. A few days after we met my daughter, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. I didn't recognize the voice at first. It was soft, hesitant, but as soon as she said my name, I knew. It was Laura. She didn't dive right in. There was a long pause, like she was waiting for me to hang up. When I didn't, she let out this shaky breath and finally spoke. "I need to explain," she said, "about everything." I stayed quiet. I wasn't sure I even wanted to hear her out, but part of me was curious, maybe for closure, or maybe just to see if she could finally own up to what she did. Laura admitted she'd thought about calling me for years. She said that every birthday, every milestone in our daughter's life, there was a moment where she almost picked up the phone, but she never did. Fear, guilt, pride. She said it all held her back. Then she told me something I didn't expect. "I didn't plan on hiding her from you," she said. "Not at first." Apparently, when she found out she was pregnant, she wanted to tell me. She said she even started writing letters, but my parents convinced her not to send them. They told her I was too angry, too heartbroken, and that reaching out would only make things worse. According to Laura, they painted this picture of me as someone who was better off not knowing, someone who would be better without the baggage of a child from a broken marriage. But that wasn't the full story. Carl didn't want me to know, either. Laura admitted he was insecure, terrified that if I found out about the baby, I'd try to fight for custody. "He thought you'd take her away," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I was scared too." I couldn't help but scoff at that. Scared of what? That I'd actually want to be involved? That I'd love my own child? Laura went quiet for a second, then said, I think I didn't want to face you. I knew what I'd done was wrong. If I told you, I'd have to see that look in your eyes, the one where you didn't even recognize me anymore." That hit harder than I expected. She said she convinced herself she was doing the right thing, keeping the peace, sparing me the pain, but deep down, she knew it was a lie. As the years passed, she felt trapped. Every time she thought about telling our daughter the truth, Carl would talk her out of it. He told her it would destroy their family, that she'd grow up resenting them both. So, they let the lie fester, hoping it would just disappear into the background. "I wanted to tell her," Laura said, her voice cracking. "I swear I did. But once we started down that path, I didn't know how to stop." She broke down after that, apologizing over and over, but I didn't say much. What was there to say? After a while, Laura admitted that she knew this was coming the moment she saw my message to our daughter. She knew it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. Before she hung up, she said something I'll probably never forget. "I know you hate me. I deserve it. But please, don't hate her. She's a good kid, and she didn't ask for any of this." That was the one thing we agreed on. Laura made her choices. So did Carl. And now, they'll have to live with them. But our daughter? She's the only one I care about fixing things with. The day my daughter met her half-brother felt heavier than I expected. I thought I'd be the one feeling anxious, but as it turns out, my son was more nervous than anyone. He's only 8, and while we tried to explain everything in a way he could understand, it's not exactly easy to tell a kid, "Hey, surprise, you've got a big sister you've never met." We decided to keep things simple. No big speeches, no over-explaining. Just let them meet and see how it goes. My daughter agreed to meet us at a park near her campus. We figured somewhere open and casual would make things feel less awkward. When she walked up, my son stood behind my wife, gripping her hand tight. His usual confidence was nowhere to be found. My daughter, though, she was calm. She smiled at him and crouched down to his level. "Hey there," she said. "You must be Jake." He peeked out from behind my wife and nodded. "You're my sister?" "I am," she said, holding out her hand. "It's nice to meet you." It took him a second, but eventually, he let go of my wife's hand and shook hers. That small gesture felt like a weight lifted off my chest. We spent the afternoon walking through the park, letting the kids get to know each other in their own way. My daughter was patient, answering all of Jake's random questions, even the ones that had nothing to do with our situation. At one point, Jake looked up at her and said, "I always wanted a big sister. I didn't know I had one." She laughed. "Well, I didn't know I had a little brother either." By the time we sat down for ice cream, Jake was glued to her side. He kept asking if she could come visit us during the summer, and she promised she would try. Later that night, as we drove home, Jake piped up from the back seat. "I like her," he said. "She's nice." That was all I needed to hear. For the first time since all of this started, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could piece something together out of this mess. It wouldn't happen overnight, but at least we were moving forward. And that was enough for now. What would you do if you discovered you had a child who was kept from you for 20 years? Would you try to build a relationship or let the past stay in the past? How would you handle reconnecting with family who betrayed you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And thanks for being here. Make sure to subscribe to Deceived Buddy so you don't miss any new stories. And as always, see you in the next video.